Welcome to the eerie and perplexing world of Sherlock Holmes and the adventure of the creeping man. What if the person you trusted the most suddenly became unrecognizable? What if a man once dignified, wise, and respected suddenly started crawling like an animal in the dead of night? So, welcome to the eerie and perplexing world of Sherlock Holmes. And today we dive into the adventure of the creeping man, a case where science, obsession, and mystery collide. But before we begin, let me just tell you that I have not read this before. So my reactions are in real time. And I want to ask you a question. Would you take a drug that could make you younger, even if you didn't know the side effects? And how far would you go to hold on to power, status, or love? Drop your answers in the comments and let's unravel this mystery together. But before we dive into the story, I'm not sure if you heard about that billionaire tech guy who is trying to live until he's 100. I'll get the name and I'll pop it in the comments. But apparently, I watched his routine, his regimen. He takes over 100 tablets a day. He does all kinds of like cryotherapy and red light therapy. So I want to know, how far would you go to live forever? But now, let's step into 221B Baker Street, where Holmes and Watson are about to take on one of their strangest cases. Welcome to the adventure of the creeping man. Mr. Sherlock Holmes was always of opinion that I should publish the singular facts connected with Professor Presbury, if only to dispel once for all the ugly rumors which some 20 years ago agitated the university and were echoed in the learned societies of London. So Sherlock Holmes wanted him to publish the facts connected with Professor Presbury to get rid of all the rumors, which 20 years before had agitated, annoyed, gotten a reaction from the university, and this reaction was the same in the learned societies of London. There were, however, certain obstacles in the way, and the true history of this curious case remained entombed in the tin box, which contains so many records of my friend's adventures. So there's this box with all of these documents in a bank vault, in a safe somewhere, and we heard about that in book number 2. Now we have at last obtained permission to ventilate the facts. So if you ventilate a room, you are letting air into the room. Okay, so if you ventilate the facts, you are exposing the facts, opening up the facts. How do you ventilate a room? You open the windows, right? So we are opening up the facts, which formed one of the very last cases handled by Holmes before his retirement from practice. Even now, a certain reticence. So if you are reticent, you are reluctant, and discretion have to be observed in laying the matter before the public. So we've got to be discreet. We've got to be careful about exposing or giving the public all of these facts. It was one Sunday evening, early in September of the year 1903, that I received one of Holmes' laconic messages. Come at once if convenient, if inconvenient, come all the same, S.H. Sherlock Holmes. I love that. If you're free, come. If you're not free, still come. I love it. The relations between us in those latter days were peculiar, so something strange going on. He was a man of habits, narrow and concentrated habits, and I had become one of them. So I'm not sure if you are a creature of habit. I am, but are your habits narrow and concentrated? Are you quite fixed in your habits? Love to know. Comment and join the conversation. So Watson also feels like he has become one of Sherlock Holmes' habits, something that he does regularly, like maybe go shopping, go to the gym, call on Watson. As an institution, I was like the violin, the shag tobacco, the old black pipe, the index books, and others perhaps less excusable. So I was like one of the things that he had around him. I was part of his comfort zone. That's the vibe I'm getting. When it was a case of active work and a comrade was needed upon whose nerve he could place some resilience, my role was obvious. But apart from this, I had uses. I was a whetstone for his mind. I stimulated him. So I was comfortable to have around. He liked that, but he also needed someone who could hold his nerve. So I had my role in his life, but I was also a whetstone for his mind. I stimulated him. I got him to think, maybe creatively, and he liked to think aloud in my presence. His remarks could hardly be said to be made to me. Many of them would have been as appropriately addressed to his bedstead. So it wasn't even as if he were talking to me. He was just talking. He could have been talking to his headboard. Um, he just needed to talk. But nonetheless, having formed the habit, it had become in some way helpful that I should register and interject. So they've kind of got this dance going on. Holmes talks, Watson responds. But he may as well have been a piece of furniture. I don't think his opinion was really wanted or needed. If I irritated him by a certain methodical slowness in my mentality, that irritation served only to make his own flame-like intuitions and impressions flash up more vividly and swiftly. Such was my humble role in our alliance. So Watson admits that he was sometimes quite slow because he was methodical. That was how his mind operated. That's his character, and it irritated Holmes. But it also served a purpose because he reacted to this. So, kind of like Watson has a role. All right. When I arrived at Baker Street, I found him huddled up in his armchair with updrawn knees, his pipe in his mouth, and his brow furrowed with thought. It was clear that he was in the throes of some vexatious problem. So I have to admit that I haven't really seen the word vexatious before. I haven't used it, but the verb vex, okay, is more familiar to me. So vex, if you vex someone, you annoy them, you maybe even irritate them. Vex, it's a beautiful word, and I'm going to try to include some of the vocab in the comments below, which is why I'm grabbing my notebook just to write down the words and phrases that I'd like to share with you in the comments. So check that out, right? Vex. So he's got this problem that is bothering him, he's struggling with it, it's annoying him, right? So with a wave of his hand, he indicated my old armchair, but otherwise, for half an hour, he gave no sign that he was aware of my presence. Then with a start, he seemed to come out of his reverie, his deep thoughts, and with his usual whimsical smile, he greeted me back to what had once been my home. So Watson had once lived there. You will excuse a certain abstraction of my mind, my dear Watson, said he. So I'm kind of distracted abstraction of mind. Some curious facts have been submitted to me within the last 24 hours, and they in turn have given rise to some speculations of a more general character. I have serious thoughts of writing a small monograph about the uses of dogs in the work of the detective. Okay, so he's got this new idea. But surely, Holmes, this has been explored, said I. It's been done. Bloodhounds, sleuthhounds. No, no, Watson, that side of the matter is of course obvious, but there is another which is far more subtle. You may recollect that in the case which you, in your sensational way, coupled with the copper beeches, I was able, by watching the mind of a child, to form a deduction as to the criminal habits of the very smug and respectable father. So they're referring to another case. And like I said, I'm reading this for the first time. I have no idea what they are chatting and chattering on about. Yes, I remember it well. My line of thoughts about dogs is analogous. A dog reflects the family life. So this is an analogy. Whoever saw a frisky dog in a gloomy family or a sad dog in a happy one? So the dog reflects the energy, the vibe of the family. Do you agree? Do you have a dog? And is your dog frisky, energetic, or is it sad? Snarling people have snarling dogs. Dangerous people have dangerous ones, and their passing moods may reflect the passing moods of others. So I'm just wondering, if I had to buy a dog, what kind of dog would I get? Probably like a little chihuahua that goes yap, 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 yap. Yeah, that would be the right dog for me. I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments below. I shook my head. Surely, Holmes, this is a little far-fetched, said I. He had refilled his pipe and resumed his seat, taking no notice of my comment. So Watson is like, okay, this is a little over the top. I mean, you stretching. We say that, like you stretching. You trying to connect things that don't really connect. He's stretching. The practical application of what I have said is very close to the problem which I am investigating. It is a tangled skein, you understand. I am looking for a loose end. One possible loose end lies in the question, why does Professor Presbury's wolfhound, Roy, endeavor to bite him? So why does the professor's dog want to bite him? I need more details about this case. All right, I'm sure you do as well. I sank back in my chair in some disappointment. Was it for so trivial a question as this that I had been summoned from my work? Holmes glanced across at me. So Watson is thinking, like, really? This is what you called me here for? The same old Watson, said he. You never learn that the gravest issues may depend upon the smallest things. So he's saying the devil is in the details. Yeah, it's not the details are in the devil. The devil is in the details. So look at the small things, they are important. But is it not on the face of it strange that a staid, elderly professor, you've heard of Presbury, of course, the famous Camford physiologist, that such a man whose friend has been his devoted wolfhound should now have been twice attacked by his own dog? What do you make of it? So he's very curious, confused about why the dog would attack this professor. The dog is ill. That's Watson's diagnosis or his conclusion. Well, that has to be considered, but he attacks no one else, nor does he apparently molest his master, save on very special occasions. So he doesn't do this all the time, just every now and then. But also, he doesn't attack anyone else. Curious, Watson, very curious. But young Mr. Bennet is before his time, if that is his ring. I had hoped to have a longer chat with you before he came. So now he's saying, oh, someone's ringing the bell, and it's Mr. Bennet, and he is early. He is before his time. I had been hoping to have a longer chat with you, but, he's here. I thought I'd have more time to chat before Mr. Bennet arrived. There was a quick step on the stairs, a sharp tap at the door, and a moment later, the new client presented himself. There's always in the Sherlock Holmes short stories the person coming up the stairs and the footfall, the sound and weight and pressure of the footsteps says a lot about the individual, doesn't it? And this guy, Mr. Bennet, has a quick step, so he's moving very quickly, and it's a sharp tap at the door, and a moment later, he's in the room. He was a tall, handsome youth, about 30, well-dressed and elegant, but with something in his bearing which suggested the shyness of the student rather than the self-possession of the man of the world. So your bearing is the way you present yourself, your body language, could we say that? Your bearing, your body language, yes. He shook hands with Holmes and then looked with some surprise at me. So almost like, what are you doing here? This matter is very delicate, Mr. Holmes. It's very sensitive. It's very confidential. It's a delicate matter. So I don't want it being discussed with other people. I don't want it being discussed in front of other people. Um, Consider the relation in which I stand to Professor Presbury, both privately and publicly. I really can hardly justify myself if I speak before any third person. So this is a very sensitive matter. I can't actually speak in front of Watson. And Holmes replies, have no fear, Mr. Bennet. Relax. Don't stress. Mr. Watson is the very soul of discretion. And if you are discreet, it means you can be trusted. You don't go around blabbing your mouth. He will not repeat what is said here. He's very discreet. He is the soul of discretion. And that is a beautiful phrase. I've actually used it many times in my life. And I have a friend who is the soul of discretion. I've also met many people who are not the soul of discretion. And if you ask me where I fit, I would say it depends on the situation. And I can assure you that this is a matter in which I am very likely to need an assistant. So I'm actually going to need Watson. I need his assistance, so I think he needs to be here for this discussion. As you like, Mr. Holmes. You will, I am sure, understand my having some reserves in the matter. So I have my reservations, I have my doubts, okay, and having some reserves in the matter. This is a very old style of speaking, which is why I like to work through these short stories and try to bring the story into the 21st century for you, and also because I'm really enjoying Sherlock Holmes. So you will appreciate it, Mr. Watson, when I tell you that this gentleman, Mr. Trevor Bennet, is a professional assistant to the great scientist, lives under his roof and is engaged to his only daughter. So there's someone new in the story. So we've got Mr. Trevor Bennet and we've got the daughter. He's engaged to the daughter. He's the fiancé. Certainly, we must agree that the professor has every claim upon his loyalty and devotion, but it may best be shown by taking the necessary steps to clear up this strange mystery. And the mystery is that the dog is biting the professor? Okay. I hope so, Mr. Holmes. That is my one object. That's my objective. Does Mr. Watson know the situation? I have not had time to explain it. Then perhaps I'd better go over the ground again before explaining some fresh developments. So maybe I need to fill him in with some backstory, go over the ground again, and then tell you what has happened recently, fresh developments, updates. I will do so myself, said Holmes, in order to show that I have the events in their due order. The professor, Watson, is a man of European reputation. His life has been academic. There has never been a breath of scandal. He is a widower with one daughter, Edith. He is, I gather, a man of a very virile and positive, one might almost say combative character. So the matter stood until a very few months ago. So to summarize, he is an academic. He is European. He is a widower. His wife died. He has a daughter, and he's got quite a robust, strong character, if I understood this correctly. Then the current of his life was broken. He is 61 years of age, but he became engaged to the daughter of Professor Morphy, his colleague in the chair of comparative anatomy. It was not, as I understand, the reasoned courting of an elderly man, but rather the passionate frenzy of youth, for no one could have shown himself a more devoted lover. Oh, wow. Okay, this is interesting. So, suddenly, at the age of 61, after having been a widow, he suddenly falls in love with his colleague's daughter and he becomes engaged to her. And it wasn't this calm relationship where it's an old man looking for a companion or for a caregiver. No, it's this passionate frenzy of youth. Wow. The lady, Alice Morphy, was a very perfect girl, both in mind and body, so that there was every excuse for the professor's infatuation. It's understandable why he was infatuated with her, while he fell head over heels in love with her. She was perfect in her mind, so she had a beautiful, strong mind, an intelligent mind, and a body. So physically and mentally, intellectually, she was perfection. Nonetheless, it did not meet with full approval in his own family. Well, big surprise there. That's usually the case, isn't it? When an elderly man wants to marry a much younger woman. Have you ever encountered that kind of story, maybe with, where you've seen the situation in a family matter? Just curious. It's not that unusual. So we thought it rather excessive, said our visitor. Exactly, excessive and a little violent and unnatural. Professor Presbury was rich. However, there was no objection upon the part of the father. So if he's rich and she's young and beautiful, is the implication that she is a gold digger? Interesting. And the father didn't object, which is kind of strange because as a father, would you want your daughter to marry a 61-year-old man? The daughter, however, had other views, and there were already several candidates for her hand who, if they were less eligible from a worldly point of view, were at least more of an age. Okay, so she had other suitors, other people who were courting her. And the girl seemed to like the professor in spite of his eccentricities. It was only age which stood in the way. So the only problem was age. She actually liked him. She liked the fact that he was slightly eccentric. So if you're eccentric, you're kind of a little bit strange. I'm trying to think of who is quite eccentric. Oh gosh, names always confound me. I'm trying to think of the actress who was in Edward Scissorhands. Hold on a moment while I check. Oh, Helena Bonham Carter. Helena Bonham Carter. I think she's quite eccentric, isn't it? Wonderfully eccentric. So about this time, a little mystery suddenly clouded the normal routine of the professor's life. He did what he had never done before. He left home and gave no indication where he was going. He was away for a fortnight and returned looking rather travel-worn. So travel-worn, tired, jet-lagged in the 21st century. Okay. Except that he probably traveled by train, so there was no jet lag involved. He made no allusion to where he had been. He didn't talk about where he had been, although he was usually the frankest of men. So usually he was quite open, quite frank, but this time His lips were sealed. He wasn't saying anything. It chanced, however, that our client here, Mr. Bennet, received a letter from a fellow student in Prague who said that he was glad to have seen Professor Presbury there, although he had not been able to talk to him. Only in this way did his own household learn where he had been. So he had, well, he hadn't bumped into the student, but the student, he'd been sighted, he'd been seen in Prague. Now comes the point. From that time onward, a curious change came over the professor. He became furtive and sly, so there's this mystery around him. He's not being forthright. Those around him had always the feeling that he was not the man that they had known, but that he was under some shadow which had darkened his higher qualities. His intellect was not affected. His lectures were as brilliant as ever, but always there was something new, something sinister and unexpected. His daughter, who was devoted to him, tried again and again to resume the old relations and to penetrate this mask which her father seemed to have put on. So there's this real obvious change in the professor. You, sir, as I understand, did the same, but all was in vain. And now, Mr. Bennet, tell in your own words the incident of the letters. So basically, Holmes summarized what's been happening so far, and then he asked Bennet to update them. You must understand, Dr. Watson, that the professor had no secrets from me. If I were his son or his younger brother, I could not have more completely enjoyed his confidence. He treated me like family. As his secretary, I handled every paper which came to him, and I opened and subdivided his letters. Shortly after his return, all this was changed. He told me that certain letters might come to him from London, which would be marked by a cross under the stamp. They were to be set aside for his own eyes only. Certainly he has a secret. I may say that several of these did pass through my hands, that they had the EC mark, and were in an illiterate handwriting. If he answered them at all, the answers did not pass through my hands nor into the letter basket in which our correspondence was collected. So these letters started coming through. He was told not to open them. They were none of his business. And then he's not quite sure if the professor responded to them, but if he did it very privately. He did not use the basket where all of the outpost was placed, right? The post that needed to be sent off. Ah, yes, the box. The professor brought back a little wooden box from his travels. It was the one thing which suggested a continental tour, for it was one of those quaint carved things which one associates with Germany. This he placed in his instrument cupboard. One day, in looking for a cannula, I took up the box and I had to go and check the meaning for cannula because I'd never heard this before. So a cannula is a thin tube inserted into a vein or body cavity to administer medication, to drain off fluid, or insert a surgical instrument. To my surprise, he was very angry and reproved me in words which were quite savage for my curiosity. So this was not a normal reaction, probably not the way he would have responded in the past. It was the first time such a thing had happened, and I was deeply hurt. I endeavored to explain, I tried to explain, that it was a mere accident that I had touched the box. But all the evening I was conscious that he looked at me harshly and that the incident was rankling in his mind. So if something rankles, it irritates, it annoys, it bothers. It's a beautiful word. I love advanced English words, and I love words that have Latin roots, and I have a feeling that rankle would have Latin roots, and it will be in the comment section below. Mr. Bennet drew a little diary book from his pocket. That was on July 2nd, said he. I learned method, among other things, from my great teacher. From the time that I observed abnormality in his behavior, I felt that it was my duty to study his case, so this behavior is quite abnormal. Thus, I have it here that it was on that very day, July 2nd, that Roy attacked the professor as he came from his study into the hall. Again, on July 11th, there was a scene of the same sort, and then I have a note of yet another upon July 20th. After that, we had to banish Roy to the stables. He was a dear, affectionate animal, but I fear I weary you. So they sent the dogs off to the stables because of the attacks, and he says, I fear I weary you. I think I'm boring you with all these details. Mr. Bennet spoke in a tone of reproach, for it was very clear that Holmes was not listening. So Mr. Bennet was not being polite or kind when he says, I fear I weary you. Oh, it looks like I'm boring you, because Holmes was not listening. His face was rigid and his eyes gazed abstractedly at the ceiling. So if I do this, you're going to say, oh, you bored? Am I boring you? With an effort, he recovered himself. So with some effort, he tried to look interested again. Singular. Most singular, he murmured. These details are new to me, Mr. Bennet. I think we have now fairly gone over the old ground, have we not? But you spoke of some fresh developments. So, okay, I know all this, old news. Now tell me about the new stuff. The pleasant, open face of our visitor clouded over, shadowed by some grim remembrance. What I speak of occurred the night before last, said he. I was lying awake about 2 in the morning when I was aware of a dull, muffled sound coming from the passage. I opened my door and peeped out. I should explain that the professor sleeps at the end of the passage. The date being? Asked Holmes. Our visitor was clearly annoyed at so irrelevant an interruption, like, who cares, right? I have said, sir, that it was the night before last. That is September 4th. Holmes nodded and smiled. Pray, continue, said he. Please, continue. He sleeps at the end of the passage and would have to pass my door in order to reach the staircase. It was a really terrifying experience, Mr. Holmes. I think that I am as strong-nerved as my neighbors, but I was shaken by what I saw. If you were shaken, you were frightened, you were terrified. The passage was dark, save that one window halfway along it threw a patch of light. So the passageway was darkness, but there was one window that let in some light. I could see that something was coming along the passage, something dark and crouching. Then suddenly it emerged into the light, and I saw that it was he. He was crawling, Mr. Holmes, crawling. He was not quite on his hands and knees. I would rather say on his hands and feet, with his face sunk between his hands, almost like a downward dog yoga position. What are your thoughts? Yet he seemed to move with ease. I was so paralyzed, so shocked by the sight, I could not move, that it was not until he had reached my door that I was able to step forward and ask if I could assist him. His answer was extraordinary. He sprang up, spat out some atrocious words at me, and hurried on past me and down the staircase. Atrocious, bad, not good, not good. I waited about for an hour, but he did not come back. It must have been daylight before he regained his room, went back to his room. Normally we say regain his senses, and I think this might be a play on words. Regain, instead of saying he went back to his room, he regained his room, because maybe also regained his senses, went from that crawling creature back to being the professor. It could be a play on words. Well, Watson, what make you of that? What do you think about this? Asked Holmes with the air of the pathologist who presents a rare specimen. It's like, I'm presenting this rare situation to you. What do you think? Lumbago, possibly. I have known a severe attack make a man walk in just such a way, and nothing would be more trying to the temper. So it could be a medical condition. I've seen it before. I've heard it before. This is my medical professional opinion. Good, Watson. You always keep us flat-footed on the ground. But we can hardly accept lumbago since he was able to stand erect in a moment. Okay, so great, Watson. You always keep us flat-footed on the ground. You always keep me with my feet on the ground. You always keep me reasonable, rational. The opposite would be my head is in the clouds. You keep me with my feet on the ground. You keep me realistic. But he says, but your explanation doesn't make sense because he was able to suddenly stand up straight. So it was not a medical condition. And Mr. Bennet speaks up. He says, he was never better in health. In fact, he is stronger than I have known him for years. But there are the facts, Mr. Holmes. It is not a case in which we can consult the police, and yet we are utterly at our wits' end. We are confused. We have no idea as to what to do. And we feel in some strange way that we are drifting towards disaster. Edith, Miss Presbury, feels as I do that we cannot wait passively any longer. It is certainly a very curious and suggestive case. What do you think, Watson? Speaking as a medical man, said I, it appears to be a case for an alienus. Okay, this is interesting. The old gentleman's cerebral processes were disturbed by the love affair. Okay, so he's not in his right mind. Love has made him crazy. He made a journey abroad in the hope of breaking himself of the passion. So he was trying to reset. He knows that he was losing his mind. He was madly in love. And that's why we use the phrase madly in love, because all reason goes out the window, right? And so he went abroad, he went to Prague to put some distance between him and this mad passion. His letters in the box may be connected with some other private transaction. I mean, it's not necessarily linked to the situation. It could be a loan, perhaps, or share certificates which are in the box. There could be other things in the box. Let's not make assumptions. And the wolfhound, no doubt, disapproved of the financial bargain. No, no, Watson, there is more in it than this. Now, I can only suggest. What Sherlock Holmes was about to suggest will never be known, because there was an interruption. For at this moment the door opened and a young lady was shown into the room. As she appeared, Mr. Bennet sprang up with a cry and ran forward with his hands out to meet those which she had herself outstretched. Edith, dear, nothing the matter, I hope. I felt I must follow you. Oh, Jack, I have been so dreadfully frightened. It was awful to be there alone. So this is the professor's daughter. She is Mr. Bennet's fiancée. She followed him because she did not want to be left in the house alone. It was awful to be there alone. Mr. Holmes, this is the young lady I spoke of. This is my fiancée. We were gradually coming to that conclusion, were we not, Watson? Holmes answered with a smile. He's being slightly sarcastic here. Also, Watson takes his time to reach conclusions, but I think it was pretty obvious, right? You got it immediately, so did I. I take it, Miss Presbury, that there is some fresh development in the case and that you thought we should know, so something has clearly happened. Our new visitor, a bright, handsome girl of a conventional English type, smiled back at Holmes as she seated herself beside Mr. Bennet. When I found Mr. Bennet had left his hotel, I thought I should probably find him here. Of course, he had told me that he would consult you, but oh, Mr. Holmes, can you do nothing for my poor father? I have hopes, Miss Presbury, but the case is still obscure. Perhaps what you have to say may throw some fresh light upon it. So I have hopes. I'm not without hope, but maybe you can give us some information that will help us to solve the case, throw some fresh light on it, maybe more clues about what's really going on. It was last night, Mr. Holmes. He had been very strange all day. I'm sure that there are times when he has no recollection of what he does. He lives as in a strange dream. Yesterday was such a day. It was not my father with whom I lived. His outward shell was there, but it was not really he. So he's acting really strangely, and I think that a lot of the time he doesn't even remember what's going on. Tell me what happened. I was awakened in the night by the dog barking most furiously. Poor Roy. He is chained now near the stable. I may say that I always sleep with my door locked, for as Jack, as Mr. Bennet will tell you, we all have a feeling of impending danger. We feel like something bad is about to happen. We don't know what, but we know that something bad is about to happen. My room is on the second floor. It happened that the blind was up in my window and there was bright moonlight outside. So the blinds were open, the curtains were open, big, beautiful, bright moonlight, maybe a full moon. And so I could see outside. As I lay with my eyes fixed upon the square of light, listening to the frenzied barkings of the dog, the mad barkings of the dog, I was amazed to see my father's face looking in at me. Mr. Holmes, I nearly died of surprise and horror. There it was, pressed against the window pane, and one hand seemed to be raised as if to push up the window. If that window had opened, I think I should have gone mad. It was no delusions, Mr. Holmes. Don't deceive yourself by thinking so. I dare say it was 20 seconds or so that I lay paralyzed and watched the face. Then it vanished, but I could not spring out of bed and look out after it. I lay cold and shivering till morning. At breakfast he was sharp and fierce in manner, and made no allusion to the adventure of the night. Neither did I, but I gave an excuse for coming to town, and here I am. So let's go back to what happened. She was looking out at the window. Her room is on the second floor. There's this bright patch of moonlight, and then suddenly there's this face in the window. One hand seemed raised. He wants to push open the window. She was terrified. She had gone mad. But no, it was no delusion. It was not my imagination, Mr. Holmes. It really, really happened. And it was just about 20 seconds or so. It wasn't a very long time, but I lay there. I was paralyzed. I could not move. I watched the face. Then it vanished. And I couldn't get up. I couldn't go. I couldn't see where he'd gone. And I just lay in my bed, cold and shivering. And then at breakfast, he was cold. He was sharp. He wasn't friendly. He wasn't kindly. And I didn't talk about what had happened. Neither did he. He made no allusion to the adventure of the night. He did not mention it. He did not speak about it. He did not bring it up. And I like the way they call it the adventure of the night, what had happened the night before. But then I quickly gave an excuse. I said, I'm coming to town, and here I am. Holmes looked thoroughly surprised at Miss Presbury's narrative. My dear young lady, you say that your room is on the second floor. And yes, this also grabbed my attention. When I actually went back in the text to check, was she on the first floor, ground floor? Am I getting confused between maybe American English and British English? But no, she was on the second floor. And Holmes was also curious about that point. So let's see what happens. Is there a long ladder in the garden? Because if you are on the second floor, you're not on the ground floor. You're not on the bottom, right? So is there a ladder? Is that how he got up to your window? No, Mr. Holmes, that is the amazing part of it. There is no possible way of reaching the window, and yet he was there. The date being September 5th, said Holmes. That certainly complicates matters. It was the young lady's turn to look surprised, like, what's the date got to do with it? This is the second time that you have alluded to the date, Mr. Holmes, said Bennet. Is it possible that it has any bearing upon the case? You keep talking about the date. What's it got to do with the case? It is possible, very possible, and yet I have not my full material at present. Because look, the date could be a factor, but I don't have all my material. I don't have all the facts. Possibly you are thinking of the connection between insanity and phases of the moon. Yeah, that's where I was going. But he says, no, I assure you, it was quite a different line of thought. Possibly you can leave your notebook with me and I will check the dates. Now, I think, Watson, that our line of action is perfectly clear. This young lady has informed us, and I have the greatest confidence in her intuition that her father remembers little or nothing which occurs upon certain dates. We will therefore call upon him as if he had given us an appointment upon such a date. He will put it down to his own lack of memory. Thus, we will open our campaign by having a good close view of him. So, on these dates, he does not remember anything that happens. All right, so we're going to go in and we're going to tell him that we had an appointment with him on one of these dates, and he's not going to admit that he doesn't know. He's not going to admit that there are gaps in his memory. He's just going to say nothing probably, but this will give us access to him and we'll get a good view of him up close and personal, as we say. That is excellent, said Mr. Bennet. I warn you, however, that the professor is irascible and violent at times. So, irascible. So, irascible would be having or showing a tendency to be easily angered. He is an irascible and difficult man. Irascible. So, easily angered. Someone who sees red quite easily. And if you liked the fact that I could call up the definition, well, you need to get a Kindle. One of the advantages of Kindle versus traditional paper books. By the way, which one are you a fan of? Are you ready to move on? All right, so Holmes smiled. There are reasons why we should come at once, very cogent reasons, if my theories hold good. And a cogent argument would be a clear, logical, or convincing argument. So there's a very good reason. If my theories hold good, if my theory is correct. Tomorrow, Mr. Bennet, you will certainly see us in Camford. Tomorrow will see us. We will be there tomorrow. There is, if I remember right, an inn called the Checkers, where the port used to be above mediocrity. So there's a pub called Checkers where the port is really good, above mediocrity, more than mediocre. It's a very nice way to say it's excellent. And the linen was above reproach. If it's above reproach, you can't find fault with it. So if you say someone is above reproach, his actions are above reproach, perfect. You cannot criticize him for anything. So if the linen, the tablecloths are above reproach, this is a quality establishment. I think, Watson, that our lot for the next few days might lie in less pleasant places. So we're going to go there, and I remember this beautiful place, but I don't think we're going to be having a good time, Watson. Monday morning found us on our way to the famous university town, an easy effort on the part of Holmes, who had no routes to pull up, but one which involved frantic planning and hurrying on my part, as my practice was by this time not inconsiderable. So, Monday morning, we made our way to this famous town, and you know what? It was very easy for Holmes to just make this trip. He doesn't have much going on. He doesn't have roots to pull up, so he is not, I don't want to say responsible, but he's more flexible. He's not rooted, so he doesn't have strong connections to things. He can just get up and go. If you're not rooted, you can just get up and go. But me, on the other hand, well, I had a lot of planning to do because my practice was pretty big. If it's not inconsiderable, it means it was not small, which means it's pretty big. Holmes made no allusion to the case until after we had deposited our suitcases at the ancient hostel of which he had spoken. I think, Watson, that we can catch the professor just before lunch. He lectures at 11 and should have an interval at home. So if he lectures before 11, he probably goes home for lunch. He takes a break, an interval at home. He takes a break at home. What possible excuse can we have we, for calling? Holmes glanced at his notebook. There was a period of excitement upon August the 26th. We will assume that he's a little hazy as to what he does at such times. If we insist that we are there by appointment, I think he will hardly venture to contradict us. Have you the effrontery necessary to put it through? So we're going to talk about this incident, and he's not going to challenge us in any way because his memory is a little hazy. And if we insist that he had made an appointment with us on that day to come today, he's not going to remember it, but he's not going to contradict us either, because if he does, he's going to be exposing himself and he's hiding something. Now, this is a beautiful word. Let's check it out. Effrontery. Effrontery. It means, are you insolent enough? Are you impudent enough? Do you have kind of the confidence to challenge, to do this, to put this through? We can but try. Excellent, Watson. Compound of the busy bee and Excelsior. We can but try. The motto of the firm. A friendly native will surely guide us. So he says that a friendly native will surely guide us. Such a one on the back of a smart, a handsome cab, horse, drawn a carriage, swept us past a row of ancient colleges and finally turning into a tree-lined drive, pulled up at the door of a charming house girt round with lawns and covered with purple wisteria. So there were lawns, gardens, greenery all around it. Professor Presbury was certainly surrounded with every sign not only of comfort, but also a bit of luxury, right? So it looks like a very comfortable home, the home of a wealthy person. So it wasn't just comfortable, but it was luxurious. Even as we pulled up, a grizzled head appeared at the front window, and we were aware of a pair of keen eyes from under shaggy brows, which surveyed us through large horn glasses. A moment later, we were actually in his sanctum. So you may have heard the phrase inner sanctum, your inner space, and the mysterious scientists whose vagary, strange behavior had brought us from London was standing before us. There was certainly no sign of eccentricity either in his manner or appearance, so he looked perfectly normal. For he was a portly, large-featured man, grave, tall, and frock-coated, with the dignity of bearing which a lecturer needs. So he was very dignified, well-presented, well-dressed. He seems completely sane, not someone who's crawling around on the floor. His eyes were his most remarkable feature, keen, observant, and clever to the verge of cunning, so almost cunning. He looked at our cards. Pray, sit down, gentlemen. What can I do for you? Mr. Holmes smiled amiably. It was the question which I was about to put to you, Professor. To me, sir? Possibly there is some mistake. I heard through a second person that Professor Presbury of Camford had need of my services. Someone told me that you needed my skills. Oh, indeed. It seemed to me that there was a malicious sparkle in the intense gray eyes. You heard that, did you? May I ask the name of your informant who told you? I am sorry, Professor, but the matter was rather confidential. If I have made a mistake, there's no harm done. I can only express my regret. Not at all. I should wish to go further in this matter. It interests me. Have you any scrap of writing, any letter of telegram to bear your assertion? Do you have some proof that you were asked to come and see me? No, I have not. I presume that you do not go so far as to assert that I summoned you. Well, I'm going to say that you're not going to make the claim that I'm the one who called you. I would rather answer no questions, said Holmes. No, I dare say not, said the professor with asperity. And what does this mean? Let's check it out. Harshness of tone or manner. So he pointed this out with asperity, kind of harshly. However, that particular one can be answered very easily without your aid. He walked across the room to the bell. Our London friend, Mr. Bennet, answered the call. Come in, Mr. Bennet. These two gentlemen have come from London under the impression that they have been summoned. You handle all my correspondence. Have you a note of anything going to a person named Holmes? No, sir, Bennet answered with a flush. That is conclusive, said the professor, glaring angrily at my companion. Now, sir, he leaned forward with his two hands upon the table. It seems to me that your position is a very questionable one. So he's now starting to get angry. What are you doing here? I'm starting to question why you are here. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. I can only repeat that I am sorry that we have made a needless intrusion. Just apologizes. Hardly enough, Mr. Holmes, the old man cried in a high, screaming voice, with extraordinary malignancy upon his face. So, you've probably heard the word malignant, right? So, it comes from, well, its connection is with a tumor, usually with cancer. Okay, so cancerous tumor. So, can you imagine this expression on his face? It's definitely not calm, not zen. He got between us and the door as he spoke, and he shook his two hands at us with furious passion. You can hardly get out of it so easily as that. His face was convulsed, and he grinned and gibbered at us in his senseless rage. I am convinced that we should have had to fight our way out of the room if Mr. Bennet had not intervened. So Mr. Bennet saved them. My dear professor, he cried, consider your position. Consider the scandal at the university. Mr. Holmes is a well-known man. You cannot possibly treat him with such discourtesy. Think of who you are. Think of who Sherlock Holmes is. Sulkily, our host, if I may call him so, well, yes, because he wasn't acting like a host, cleared the path to the door, so he moved out of the way. We were glad to find ourselves outside the house and in the quiet of the tree-lined drive. Holmes seemed greatly amused by the episode. Our learned friend's nerves are somewhat out of order, said he. Something's wrong in his head. Perhaps our intrusion was a little crude. Yeah, our Behavior was not great. We did intrude on him. It wasn't very polite. It was crude. So if you've heard the word crude, you've probably heard it in connection with language. So if someone's language is crude, they are using swear words and so on. It's unrefined. Think about it. Also, crude oil, right? Unrefined oil. So crude. And it's a very common word. It's a word that I've heard many times. I've used many times. Certain people, their behavior is crude. And Sherlock Holmes says, well, bursting in on someone in their home, it's kind of crude. Yeah. And yet we have gained that personal contact which I desired, but we achieved my objective. But dear me, Watson, he is surely at our heels. The villain still pursues us. There were the sounds of running feet behind, but it was to my relief not the formidable professor, but his assistant, who appeared around the curve of the drive. He came panting up to us. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Holmes. I wish to apologize." "My dear sir, there is no need. It is all in the way of professional experience. It's my job. It's just my job." I have never seen him in a more dangerous mood, but he grows more sinister. You can understand now why his daughter and I are alarmed. And yet his mind is perfectly clear. "Too clear," said Holmes. "That was my miscalculation. It is evident, it's obvious, it's clear that his memory is much more reliable than I had thought. By the way, can we, before we go, see the window of Miss Presbury's room?" Mr. Bennet pushed his way through some shrubs, and we had a view of the side of the house. "It is there, the second on the left. Dear me, it seems hardly accessible. And yet you will observe that there is a creeper below and a water pipe above, which gives some foothold. So there's a creeper below and there's a water pipe above. So it gives you a place to balance, to put your feet, a foothold. "I could not climb it myself," said Mr. Bennet. "Very likely it would certainly be a dangerous exploit for any normal man." Yes, it's a very dangerous thing to do, but he uses the words "for any normal man," and the implication here is that the person who did this is not normal. There was another thing I wished to tell you, Mr. Holmes. I have the address of the man in London to whom the professor writes. He seems to have written this morning, and I got it from his blotting paper. It is an ignoble position for a trusted secretary, but what else can I do? Now here we come to ignoble, so noble and the opposite of noble, so not honorable in character. So what he says is that he got the address and he got it from the blotting paper. Now, if you're wondering what this is, have you ever used a fountain pen? I have. In high school, we were forced to use fountain pens for our counting class. My teacher truly believed that it improved penmanship, that you would write better, have more control, neater handwriting if you used a fountain pen. So that's the one where you add ink to the pen and it's got those beautiful fancy nibs, and it's used for calligraphy as well. So because the ink is always wet, you use blotting paper. So you put the blotting paper over the ink to dry it faster. I know it's quite an arduous process, isn't it? But it's also quite elegant. So when you lift up the blotting paper, what do you have on it? You have the imprint, right, of what was written. So if you're ready, let's move on. Holmes glanced at the paper and put it into his pocket. Dorak, a curious name. Slavonic, I imagine. Well, it is an important link in the chain. We return to London this afternoon, Mr. Bennet. I see no good purpose to be served by our remaining. So there's no need to stay. I don't see any reason to stay. We'll be leaving. We cannot arrest the professor because he has done no crime, nor can we place him under constraint, for he cannot be proved to be mad. No action is as yet possible. So we can't have him arrested. We can't have him committed to a mental asylum. Right now, at this point, there's nothing that we can do. We can't take any action. Then what on earth are we to do? A little patience, Mr. Bennet. Things will soon develop. Unless I am mistaken, next Tuesday may mark a crisis. Certainly, we shall be in Camford on that day. Meanwhile, the general position is undeniably unpleasant, and if Miss Presbury can prolong her visit. So right now, things don't stand very well. It's not a pleasant situation. I agree, undeniably, can't deny it. And he suggests that Miss Presbury stay away a little longer. That is easy. Then let her stay till we can assure her that all danger is past. Meanwhile, let him have his way, let him do whatever he wants, and do not cross him. So long as he is in good humor, in a good mood, all is well. There he is, said Bennet in a startled whisper. Looking between the branches, we saw the tall, erect figure emerge from the hall door and swing around him. He stood leaning forward, his hands swinging straight before him, his head turning from side to side. The secretary, with the last wave, slipped off among the trees, and we saw him presently rejoin his employer, the two entering the house together in what seemed to be animated and even excited conversation. I expect the old gentleman has been putting two and two together, said Holmes, as he walked hotelward. Now, to be quite honest with you, it's the first time I've heard this phrase. I know homeward, homeward bound, going towards home, hotelward, towards the hotel. And this is the thing, when you don't know a word, it's not familiar to you, well, read it in context, read the sentence and try to guess or deduce what it means. It's what I just did. And I am 99.95% sure that I got it right. My deduction is spot on. So he struck me as having a particularly clear and logical brain from the little I saw of him. Explosive, no doubt. Okay, he got angry. But then from his point of view, he has something to explode about. If detectives are put on his track and he suspects his own household of doing it. So yes, he exploded, but he had every right to, especially if he suspected what we are doing. I rather fancy that friend Bennet is in for an uncomfortable time, so I don't think it's going to be a very pleasant day for Bennet. Holmes stopped at a post office and sent off a telegram on our way. The answer reached us in the morning, and he tossed it across to me. Have visited the Commercial Road and seen Dorak. Suave person, bohemian, elderly, keeps large general store, Mercer. Mercer is since your time, said Holmes. He is my general utility man who looks up routine business, so he's kind of a researcher. It was important to know something of the man with whom our professor was so secretly corresponding. His nationality connects up with the Prague visit. So they did a little research into this Dorak person. Thank goodness that something connects with something, said I. At present, we seem to be faced by a long series of inexplicable incidents with no bearing upon each other. Nothing seems to be connected. For example, what possible connection can there be between an angry wolfhound, so the barking dog, and a visit to Bohemia, or either of them with a man crawling down a passage at night? As to your dates, that is the biggest mystification of all. So I'm just not getting the connection. The dots are not connecting. We've got an angry dog, we've got a visit to Prague, and then we've got a man crawling down a passage at night. What do you guys who are out there listening think is going on here? What do you think is happening? I'd love to know your thoughts. Put it in the comments below. Holmes smiled and rubbed his hands. We were, I may say, seated in the old sitting room of the ancient hotel with a bottle of the famous vintage of which Holmes had spoken on the table between us. So we're sitting in the hotel and we're drinking, I think it was a wine that he spoke of, right? Now, let us take the dates first, said he, his fingertips together and his manner as if he were addressing a class. This excellent young man's diary shows that there was trouble upon the 2nd, and then from then onward, it seems to have been at 9-day intervals, with, so far as I remember, only one exception. Thus, the last outbreak upon February was on September the 3rd, which also falls into the series, as did August 26th, which preceded it. The thing is beyond coincidence. So every 9 days there was an episode, except for the one exception. I was forced to agree there's some kind of pattern happening here. Let us then form the provisional theory that every 9 days the professor takes some strong drug which has a passing but highly poisonous effect. So a provisional theory, it's just starting out provisional, not fixed, not concrete. And his idea is that every 9 days he takes some kind of potion, some kind of medication, some kind of strong drug that has these side effects, poisonous, highly poisonous effect. His naturally violent nature is intensified by it. So he's a naturally violent man, but this medication is making it worse. He learned to take his drug while he was in Prague and is now supplied with it by a Bohemian intermediary in London. This all hangs together, Watson. So what he's saying is that this all started when he went to Prague, right? And now he seems to be taking this medication. He's getting his stash from this guy in London, Dorak. And it all hangs together. It's all starting to make sense. But the dog, the face at the window, the creeping man in the passage. Well, we have made a beginning. I should not expect any fresh developments until next Tuesday. Nothing's going to happen until next Tuesday. In the meantime, we can only keep in touch with friend Bennett and enjoy the amenities of this charming town. In the morning, Mr. Bennett slipped round to bring us the latest report. So he slipped round, he came by. As Holmes had imagined, times had not been easy with him. Without exactly accusing him of being responsible for our presence, the professor had been very rough and rude in his speech and evidently felt some strong grievance. So he was really annoyed. This morning he was quite himself again, however, and had delivered his usual brilliant lecture to a crowded class. Apart from his queer fits, the strange behavior, queer, strange, said Bennett, he has actually more energy and vitality than I can ever remember, nor was his brain ever clearer. But it's not he. It's never the man whom we have known, but it's not really him. It's not the man I have always known. I don't think we have anything to fear now for a week at least, Holmes answered. I am a busy man, and Dr. Watson has his patients to attend to. Let us agree that we meet here at this hour next Tuesday, and I shall be surprised if, before we leave you again, we are not able to explain, even if we cannot perhaps put an end to your troubles. Meanwhile, keep us posted in what occurs. So next week, Tuesday, I'm going to tell you what's going on. I might not be able to fix your problems, but I can tell you more. I'd be very surprised if I don't have the answers. I saw nothing of my friend for the next few days, but on the following Monday evening, I had a short note asking me to meet him next day at the train. From what he told me as we travelled up to Camford, all was well. The peace of the professor's house had been unruffled, and his own conduct perfectly normal. This also was the report which was given us by Mr. Bennet himself when he called upon us that evening at our old quarters in the Chequers. We he heard from his London correspondent today. There was a letter and there was a small packet, each with the cross under the stamp, which warned me not to touch them. There has been nothing else. That may prove quite enough, said Holmes grimly. Now, Mr. Bennet, we shall, I think, come to some conclusion tonight. If my deductions are correct, we should have an opportunity of bringing matters to a head. So we're going to have this chance to get everything out in the open. In order to do so, it is necessary to hold the professor under observation. I would suggest, therefore, that you remain awake and on the lookout. Should you hear him pass your door, do not interrupt him, but follow him as discreetly as you can. Dr. Watson and I will not be far off. By the way, where is the key of that little box of which you spoke? Upon his keychain. I fancy our researches must lie in that direction. At the worst, the lock should not be very formidable, so the lock shouldn't be too difficult to break. Have you any other able-bodied man on the premises? Able-bodied, strong, and on the premises, on the property? There is the coachman, Macphail. Where does he sleep? Over the stables. We might possibly want him. Well, we can do no more until we see how things develop. Goodbye, but I expect that we shall see you before morning. It was nearly midnight before we took our station among some bushes immediately opposite the hall door of the professor. So we took our station, we found our spot, our lookout spot. We took our places. It was a fine night, but chilly, and we were glad of our warm overcoats. There was a breeze, and clouds were scudding across the sky. And let's check this, but scudding is very much a sailing term. Okay, so move fast in a straight line because of being driven by wind. So scudding, like a boat over water, a sailboat. It would have been a dismal vigil were it not for the expectation and excitement which carried us along, and the assurance of my comrade that we had probably reached the end of the strange sequence of events which had engaged our attention. So it would have been a dismal, terrible vigil, lookout, okay, a period of keeping awake during a time that's usually meant for sleep. So you've probably heard of a midnight vigil when someone passes away. People go to the vigil, they stay awake with the body and they pray. Now, it would have been dismal, it would have been tiresome, it would have been boring, except we were excited. And that carried us along, that kept us going because We had the feeling that we were almost at the end of this investigation. If the cycle of 9 days holds good, then we shall have the professor at his worst tonight, said Holmes. The fact that these strange symptoms began after his visit to Prague, that he is in secret correspondence with a bohemian dealer in London, who presumably represents someone in Prague, and that he received a packet from him this very day, all point in one direction. What he takes and why he takes it are still beyond our ken, so beyond our knowledge, knowledge. But that it emanates in some way from Prague is clear enough. We don't know what he's taking. We don't know why he's taking it, but we do know that it comes from Prague. It emanates, comes from. He takes it under definite directions, which regulates his ninth day system, which was the first point which attracted my attention. But his symptoms are most remarkable. Did you observe his knuckles? I had to confess that I did not. Thick and horny in a way which is quite new in my experience. Always look at the hands first, Watson, then the cuffs, trouser knees, and boots. Very curious knuckles which can only be explained by the mode of progression observed by. Holmes paused and suddenly clapped his hand to his forehead. Have you ever done that? Like a eureka moment, like, oh, I got it. I got it. I'm just looking. I thought I saw a red spot where I smacked myself on the forehead. He clapped his hand to his forehead. Oh, Watson, Watson, what a fool I have been! It seems incredible, and yet it must be true. All points in one direction. How could I miss seeing the connection of ideas? Those knuckles, how could I have passed those knuckles? And the dog, and the ivy. It's surely time that I disappeared into that little farm of my dreams. Look out, Watson, here he is. We shall have the chance of seeing for ourselves. So how did I miss it? The clues were all there. But wait, here he comes. Here he comes. We can see him in action ourselves. The hall door had slowly opened, and against the lamplit background we saw the tall figure of Professor Presbury. He was dressed in his dressing gown. As he stood outlined in the doorway, he was erect, but leaning forward with dangling arms, as when we saw him last. So his arms are dangling, leaning forward, his arms are dangling, probably dangling at his sides, right? Now he stepped forward into the drive, and an extraordinary change came over him. He sank down into a crouching position and moved along upon his hands and feet, skipping every now and then, as if he were overflowing with energy and vitality. He moved along the face of the house and then round the corner, so the face of the house, the front of the house. As he disappeared, Bennet slipped through the hall door and softly followed him. "Come, Watson, come," cried Holmes, and we stole as softly as we could through the bushes until we had gained a spot whence we could see the other side of the house, which was bathed in the light of the half-moon. The professor was clearly visible, crouching at the foot of the ivy-covered wall. As we watched him, he suddenly began, with incredible agility, to ascend it. From branch to branch he sprang, sure of foot and firm of grasp, climbing apparently in mere joy at his own powers, with no definite object in view. With his dressing gown flapping on each side of him, he looked like some huge bat glued against the side of his own house, a great square dark patch upon the moonlit wall. So he is climbing this wall and he seems to have such energy and vitality and he's having fun and he has no destination in mind. He is just Spider-Man. Did I just say that? It feels like Spider-Man. Presently, after a while, he tired of his amusement, he got tired of this game, and dropping from branch to branch, he squatted down into the old attitude and moved towards the stables, creeping along in the same strange way as before. The wolfhound was out now, barking furiously and more excited than ever when it actually caught sight of its master. It was straining on its chain and quivering with eagerness and rage. The professor squatted down. So when you squat down, you get down on your haunches, very deliberately just out of reach of the hound, so the dog couldn't quite reach him. He was just out of reach, and began to provoke it in every way possible. So if you provoke someone, you're like poking at them, and whether it's figuratively or literally, you're provoking them. You want to get a reaction out of them. And he did it in every way possible. He took handfuls of pebbles from the drive and threw them in the dog's face, prodded him with a stick which he had picked up, flicked his hands about only a few inches from the gaping mouth, and endeavored in every way to increase the animal's fury, which was already beyond control. In all our adventures, I do not know that I have ever seen a more strange sight than this impassive and still dignified figure crouching frog-like upon the ground, so on his haunches, and goading, provoking, teasing, and goading to a wilder exhibition of passion the maddened hound, which ramped and raged in front of him by all manner of ingenious and calculated cruelty. So I'm going to read that section again. In all our adventures, I do not know that I have ever seen a more strange sight than this impassive and still dignified figure, crouching frog-like upon the ground and goading to a wilder exhibition of passion the maddened hound. So he's trying to make this mad dog even crazier, which ramped and raged in front of him. So can you imagine this dog barking and snarling and growling by all manner of ingenious and calculated cruelty? So it was all very deliberate, this goading and provoking. Now, when you goad someone, it's again a synonym for provoke. You can goad someone into an argument. You say certain things, you trigger the person, you goad, you provoke, you trigger. And then in a moment it happened. It was not the chain that broke, but it was the collar that slipped, for it had been made for a thick-necked Newfoundland. We heard the rattle of falling metal, and the next instant, dog and man were rolling on the ground together, the one roaring in rage, the other screaming in a strange, shrill falsetto of terror. It was a very narrow thing for the professor's life. The savage creature had him fairly by the throat. Its fangs had bitten deep, and he was senseless before we could reach them and drag the two apart. It might have been a dangerous task for us, but Bennet's voice and presence brought the great wolfhound instantly to reason. So suddenly, the collar slipped off the dog's neck, and remember, this dog was enraged, and it attacked. And the professor and the dog are on the ground, rolling, the professor screaming in terror, and the dog bites deep, its fangs has him by the throat. And he was senseless, passed out, unconscious before we could reach them and before we could drag the two of them apart. And it would have been very, very dangerous. But then Bennett arrived, and his voice and his presence, seeing him, calmed the dog. The uproar had brought the sleepy and astonished coachman from his room above the stables. "I'm not surprised," said he, shaking his head. "I've seen him at it before. I knew the dog would get him sooner or later." The hound was secured, so the dog was tied up again, and together we carried the professor up to his room, where Bennett, who had a medical degree, helped me to dress his torn throat. So his throat had been ripped open. The sharp teeth had passed dangerously near the carotid artery, and the hemorrhage, the bleeding, was serious. In half an hour, the danger was past. I had given the patient an injection of morphia. I'm going to assume that's morphine. And he had sunk into deep sleep. Then and only then were we able to look at each other and take stock of the situation. "I think a first-class surgeon should see him," said I. "For God's sake, no!" cried Bennett. "At present the scandal is confined to our own household. It is safe with us. If it gets beyond these walls, it will never stop. Consider his position at the university, his European reputation, the feelings of his daughter. No, 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 no. It's a family secret." There's a kind of English saying that you don't tell other people what's cooking in your pot. You keep the lid on your pot. You don't let the world know your problems. And think about what will happen if word gets out. What about his position at the university? He'll get fired. His stellar reputation around Europe. And his daughter, I mean, how would she deal with this fallout? "Quite so," said Holmes. "I think it may be quite possible to keep the matter to ourselves, and also to prevent its recurrence now that we have a free hand. The key from the watch chain, Mr. Bennett. MacPhail will guard the patient and let us know if there is any change. Let us see what we can find in the professor's mysterious box." So they get the key from his watch chain. So I think he's got one of those pocket watches, and he's got the key attached to it. There was not much, but there was enough. An empty phial, another nearly full, a hypodermic syringe, several letters in a crabbed foreign hand. The marks on the envelopes showed that they were those which had disturbed the routine of the secretary. So the date stamp showed that each time one arrived, there was an episode, and each was dated from the Commercial Road and signed A. Dorak. So it came from this A. Dorak guy in Commercial Road. There were mere invoices to say that a fresh bottle was being sent to Professor Presbury, or receipt to acknowledge money. So there were invoices or there were receipts. There was one other envelope, however, in a more educated hand and bearing the Austrian stamp with the postmark of Prague. "Here we have our material," cried Holmes as he tore out the enclosure. So he opened it. "Honored colleague, since your esteemed visit, I have thought much of your case, and though in your circumstances there are some special reasons for the treatment, I would nonetheless enjoin caution, as my results have shown that it is not without danger of a kind. Now, I understand your special reasons for your request, but I am going to say be cautious, because there are side effects. There's some danger associated. It is possible that the serum of anthropoid would have been better. So there would have been a better option. I have, as I explained to you, used black-faced languor because a specimen was accessible. So the anthropoid would have been better, but I didn't use it because it wasn't accessible. Instead, I used black-faced languor. Languor is, of course, a crawler and climber, while anthropoid walks erect and is in all ways nearer, so similar to human. I beg you to take every possible precaution that there be no premature revelation of the process. So be careful, don't get caught. I don't want people to know about this too soon. I have one other client in England, and Dorak is my agent for both. Weekly reports will oblige, so I'd like updates about your progress. Yours with high esteem, H. Lowenstein. Lowenstein! The name brought back to me the memory of some snippet from a newspaper which spoke of an obscure scientist who was striving in some unknown way for the secret of rejuvenescence and the elixir of life. So, eternal life, the elixir of life and rejuvenescence, to rejuvenate, to have more energy and vitality. Lowenstein of Prague. Lowenstein with the wondrous strength-giving serum, tabooed by the profession because he refused to reveal its source. So Lowenstein had the serum. It gave strength. It was an elixir, right? But he would not reveal its source. So the medical profession did not approve it. In a few words, I said what I remembered. Bennett had taken a manual of zoology from the shelves. Languor, he read The Great Black-Faced Monkey of the Himalayan Slopes, biggest and most human of climbing monkeys. Many details were added. Well, thanks to you, Mr. Holmes, it is very clear that we have traced the evil to its source. We have the origins. The real source, said Holmes, lies, of course, in that untimely love affair which gave our impetuous professor the idea that he could only gain his wish by turning himself into a younger man. The things that people will do for love. When one tries to rise above nature, one is liable to fall below it. The highest type of man may revert to the animal if he leaves the straight road of destiny. He sat musing for a little, so he sat thinking, with the file in his hand, looking at the clear liquid within. When I have written to this man and told him that I hold him criminally responsible for the poisons which he circulates, we will have no more trouble, but it may recur. Others may find a better way. There is danger there, a very real danger to humanity. Consider, Watson, that the material, the sensual, the worldly would all prolong their worthless lives. The spiritual would not avoid the call to something higher. So those who are spiritual would be happy to die. But those who are obsessed with material things, with the sensual, the passions, the sins of the flesh, the worldly, everything that we have in this world, they would love to live forever. But the spiritual, they are happy to die and to move on to something higher, something better. It would be the survival of the least fit. What sort of cesspool may not our poor world become? And a cesspool is like, well, a sewage dump, right? An underground container for the temporary storage of liquid waste or of sewage. Suddenly, the dreamer disappeared, and Holmes, the man of action, sprang from his chair. I think there's nothing more to be said, Mr. Bennet. The various incidents will now fit themselves easily into the general scheme. The dog, of course, was aware of the change far more quickly than you. His smell would ensure that it was the monkey, not the professor, whom Roy attacked, just as it was the monkey who teased Roy. Climbing was a joy to the creature, but it was a mere chance, I take it, that the pastime brought him to the young lady's window. So he wasn't there to attack her. It was just a coincidence. There's an early train to town, Watson, but I think we shall just have time for a cup of tea at the Checkers before we catch it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this short story, Sherlock Holmes. I'd like to know your thoughts. I'd like to know your comments. And I'd like to know what other short stories you'd like me to read, analyze, and explain in the future. And so, the mystery is solved. A tale of ambition gone too far, a scientist who played with nature, and a lesson that some secrets are really better left undiscovered. What did you think of this case? Was Professor Presbury a victim of science, or was he responsible for his own downfall? And do you think that Sherlock Holmes was right to intervene? Tell me in the comments below. Let's discuss this. And if you love Sherlock Holmes, if you love classic detective stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more thrilling mysteries. And if you also like this type of story, then go over to our book club and check out the Frankenstein readings. But until next time, keep your magnifying glass close and your mind even sharper, bookworms. Keep reading. See you in the next mystery.